Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil, the business connection, a leading business podcast talking about business in the world. I'm Tom Reaoch, known as the king of networking, podcasting, and connecting people from my studio in Brazil. Today's guest is Jayme Callado, and he's joining us from Rio de Janeiro. Jayme is an international analyst, a foreign policy analyst, and recently certified for negotiation for Humanitarian Access, disaster ready. He speaks several languages, English, French, Mandarin, Portuguese, and Spanish, and has visited over 20 countries throughout this world. So, Jayme, welcome again to Talk to Brazil, the business connection.
Well, thank you, Tom. I'm really happy to be here once again.
Yeah, you've been on. We've talked many times about business, about China.
Yeah.
You've actually lived there. You studied there.
Yeah.
So you really do have a view from within Brazil. But as a Brazilian, you also have a view outside of Brazil, looking back. And as you've interacted with many of the different cultures and obviously speak several languages, so you've had good communication with everybody. But to our listeners today, a couple weeks ago, I posted an article on LinkedIn about the African culture in Brazil. And you answered that very quickly, and you answered with a great comment. And I'd like you to share some of that with our listeners, because my impression is that most people outside of Brazil really don't have an understanding of, one, what is the African culture influence in Brazil, all right? How deeply involved it is, and what Brazil's all about culturally.
Yeah, indeed. It was a great post, actually. I love it because, as you said, as you have just said, we don't have internationally, globally, people understand Brazil in a different way. People, the African culture, the Black culture here, normally people say about samba or carnival, but it's also a white person like talking about Black culture, but it's more than that. It's deeper than that. And your post touched me in a way that I reflect on it, because if I'm not get all wrong here. I remember that I said something about some words, even some words that in Brazilian Portuguese
and the language,
that came from African languages. And even the concept of Africa here, and in many places around the world, people say that, they are Africans. But in African has a lot of different cultures, a lot of different ethnic groups, and even here, we don't have the large majority don't have understanding of what is those kind of ethnic groups really are, and how they influenced us here in Brazil. So I comment about, for example, words from axé, abadá in Portuguese speaking, right? Cachimbo and etc. came from African origin.
Another thing, we here in Portuguese, as we speak those, we really don't know where they came from, but we just say them.
Yeah. And actually, some ways of some words that in different regions of Brazil we speak in different ways. For example, you are in Campinas, right? Mm-hmm. So probably people there, words like calor, for example, or people say that calor, they use the R sound in the end of the words. Here in Rio and Bahia, maybe, people say calor, amor, that means love in Portuguese. So this kind of way of speaking came from African languages. Because in African language, the large majority, they omit the end sound of words. For example, we say here a deity of the sea, the mother of the oceans, the Iemanjá. Here in Portuguese, we say Iemanjá. But actually, his real name is Yeye Omo Yeja. Yeye Omo Yeja. Uh, I don't know if you could get, but Yeye Omo Yeja. So they make some kind of stopping
Right.
pauses. They make pauses between some words. This influence a lot in Rio de Janeiro, for example. We don't say amor or amor. We say amor, amor. This is really interesting, and this we have. Um, a lot of different ways to say things, and actually even like we say, for example, United States. I remember when I was living there in Northwest California, people would say for in reference of her lovely partner, like sugar or something
Right.
like sweet, right?
Right.
So here we say uh, my dengo,
Dango.
my
Right.
amigo, dengo, right? These words come from Africa, and the majority of people don't know that.
Well, coming from
and
Africa and back to you, because
yeah,
your origins as a person are mixed.
yes,
Tell us
totally
about
mixed.
that.
Yeah, part of my family came from Europe.
Hmm.
Actually, recently I made a DNA test to understand better my African origin because we don't have any register here
Mm.
about my African culture. So I start to research.
Right.
You know, my family, Callado family, comes from Portugal and Spain.
Hmm.
In Portugal, came from Avis, that's the city, and Callado families there have a foundation. Abreu Callado family.
Hmm.
They were producers of wine, beef, etc. And the white part of my family, I have a lot of information. I can research, I easily find.
Right.
That's why that's another part of the part of the racism that you have here. We don't have registered about
Right.
our
Well,
black background.
that's the
So
challenge to finding about culture.
yeah. So I made this DNA test, and I find out really interesting that part of my black family came from Nigeria. That's another country that's really mixed.
Hmm.
Maybe the Brazil and Nigeria are the most ethnic ethnic groups mixed country, right?
Right. Right.
Uh, Nigeria came from Kenya, partner came from Kenya and north of Tanzania.
Mm.
My DNA is because in my DNA, maybe 5 or 7% of my DNA came from Maasai family.
Ah.
It's another the Maasai ethnic group that actually the origin as a Sudan today, but they
Mm.
immigrate in the 17th century to the Kenya and north of the south of Tanzania of Kenya and north of Tanzania.
Hmm.
Right. So this is interesting because the family, this group, the ethnic group, is also around the cattle. You know,
Cattle. Ah.
yeah. The beef producers like Portuguese, but actually in Africa, look at this. I was so
Well, that's
impressed,
interesting. Just
and that
I want to put an
yeah
aside for our listeners because I didn't
yeah
mention that at the beginning. But
yeah
actually, what you do professionally, uh,
yes
you're into beef.
yes yes
So
yeah
you're your
yes
commercial representative, or your sales representative
yes
for
yes
beef here
yes
in Brazil. So
yes
now we know
yes
the story.
Yeah, yeah. So I actually when I look at the results of the DNA test, I was so glad, and grateful. Wow, my black family came from from
From
breeding
cattle.
cattle,
Ah,
right? Yeah, breeding cattle. This ethnic group is everything's around the breeding cattle, right? So it's really maybe the first group in the humanity who could to breed cattle. What's really interesting
well,
because
that's a more than interesting point because when we look to
yeah,
Brazil and
yeah,
back to cattle, and today there are more cattle in Brazil than there are people.
yes,
And
indeed,
Brazil is probably the largest exporter
yes,
worldwide of cattle.
yes,
And when you get to the origins of where did the cattle come from, then
yes,
you have North European, probably Africa, India. They say,
indeed,
wow, Brazil has become a highly integrated cattle market,
yes,
and with
yes,
more cattle than people. And back to
yes,
the DNA. So we have the DNA of people, we have the DNA of cattle,
yes,
right? And
right,
and and the more we mix, the more you see that is mixed, right? Then
right,
you do gather together a number of, it's not the qualities, but a number of cultural identities.
yes, like us,
Like exactly.
yes,
And part of that adaptation of coming here, because
yes,
most of Brazil, is a very hot climate. So adaptation for people and cattle cross the same paths. And
yes,
those,
for
obviously,
sure,
the African culture persons culturally adapted to that. Northern Europeans or
oh,
North Americans are more accustomed to cold. And
yes,
so when they come down here or go to Africa or other part of India and really have to face extreme high temperatures, the
yes,
body's
yes,
not used to that. So this mixture of cultures, and we're talking about
yes,
people today.
yes,
Obviously, you get to the second stage. You're talking about language. You're talking about the integration of communication,
yes, of
and
course,
and you are a communicator from all the languages you speak, and different
yes,
languages. It's rare to find anybody who speaks Mandarin, right?
yeah,
No, and you've seen some very different cultures in
yes,
your journeys,
yes,
right? And
yes,
many of those cultures, the
sorry,
same cultures. If you look back to Brazil, you said Portuguese, Chinese that are here, Japanese that are here, Koreans that have come
yes,
here.
Koreans,
Many
yes,
not only North Europeans, the Spanish, the
yes,
Portuguese you
yes,
mentioned, Germans, English,
German,
Polish,
Russians,
Russians,
Ukrainians,
Greek. Yeah, and so it
yes,
has been, it still is a melting pot. And that was one of the things when I first came many years ago that I found, I'm going to say, striking in a good sense.
yes,
Because besides all of that, Brazil also has a very strong native culture. There are the native indigenous cultures that are multiple. There,
yes,
and back to what you mentioned about words, about communication. There are many Indian origin words that have been assimilated
yes,
into the culture, into the names of cities, names of rivers, names of places, names of people. So all
for
of that
sure,
together at first for me was hard to understand what that all meant because Portuguese is hard to understand anyway. But to separate those things and to understand those, of where did everything come from, was very
yes,
interesting. And to the color aspect, all right.
yes,
In the States, normally I don't want to say it's cut and dry, but most people think black and white.
yes,
And when I came to Brazil, even in the language, people would refer to the color of persons in shades, not in color.
for sure,
So there are
yes,
like five different words for shades. I
yes,
said, wow, and when you start understanding, and then people really are. So you have shades,
yeah,
you have completely
yeah,
white, completely black, and you have a whole
yeah,
bunch in the middle.
yes,
And then you add
yes,
to the indigenous cultures that mix, the Japanese, and other Asian cultures that mix. So you have a physically, I would say, inspiring group of people
Yeah.
that you really don't see or find anywhere else.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Indeed, you say that no, it's correct. What you're saying is correct. Here in Brazil, we have something that we call colorism.
Colorism. Okay.
Colorism. The colorism is talk about the shades, of the black. Um, um, why? Because here in Brazil, the who has the power or the white people, right? Because the European when they came here, the Portuguese came to here was came from the political background was influenced a lot here in Brazil, right? Not only Portuguese but also French because especially in 19th century.
Right.
France was the great power, the great light when it comes about politics around the world. We have a Napoleonic,
Right.
age. So this influenced a lot here, especially here in Rio,
And for
and
our
actually,
listeners, Rio was the political capital of the country years ago.
yeah, it was the capital of Brazil. And actually was a realm, was a kingdom, right? So this is influenced a lot. So the power, the economical power and the political power was in hands, actually still,
Right.
right, in the hands of white people. So people here that were mixed, they had an understanding that, oh, I cannot be black. So I must be, close to the white reference. Why? Because black here means that you were enslaved.
Or he descends into a slave, right?
Yeah. And marginalized. That is still today, right? So that's why. So colorism, I'm not black. I'm a part person. I'm a yellow person. I'm pink person, but I'm never black. I'm never black. So even when we talk about literature, right? And we have a lot. We have a great Machado de Assis, a great writer and thinker of 19th century, and he, for example, is a black person. Was a black person, and people don't say that that he was black. He was the a kind of witch of the some places, like we say that it was the bruxo de Cosmivelho, that was like a magician or a witch of Cosmivelho. It's a neighborhood here in Rio, right? So we associate with different kind of words, just to don't mention that he was black, right? So we have, unfortunately, we passed through all of this, and we still have this problem. So we, in general, we do not want to be recognized as black person, right? Because all of that I have just mentioned. Um, and this is, it's sad.
Profiling. People talk about profiling out there, racial
Yes,
profiling.
yes,
Really,
a
when you
lot.
get back to the olden days when a writer could have written a book, and most people would never have seen who wrote it. They would see the name. But really, they couldn't say a picture or a figure of who that person was. But since that
Yes,
person did write it, it was a book. many times they would just assume that that person was white. That person
Yeah,
obviously
of
did go to
course.
school somewhere, and he was
Yeah,
let's
yeah,
say, an educated person. All right.
yes, yes,
And
for sure,
today,
for sure.
uh, you see, everybody sees. You
Yes,
just open up your phone and click on anything, and you have a visual image of everything. And what people see and what they feel when they see,
yes,
mentally, that's where profiling starts.
yes, for
And
sure, and for sure, and that's why we have actually today a movement that try to to recognize the black as a culture as important as we are,
mhm,
and we have a point to actually throughout, for centuries, uh, black here were marginalized. Why? Because the slavery period was
mhm,
really large here in Brazil.
right,
So finished in the end in the second half of 19th century,
mhm,
actually officially, right?
right,
But still today we have some problem with slavery or modern slavery here in Brazil and in a lot of places in the world. But today the modern slavery is more connected about we don't have about color.
right.
It's more connected about the lack of wealth of poor people, right?
Right,
Who have
economically challenged persons,
economic challenges
and economically and
so,
educationally challenged, because
true,
for our
true.
listeners, we do have many people. The educational system doesn't favor that either. But in Brazil, you
Yeah,
have a
for
very
sure.
large portion of Brazilians who unfortunately are what we would call functionally illiterate.
Yes, yes,
And Brazil is a country, and I found that myself in my work here. It's a country of verbal interaction, and
yes,
it's a country of visual interaction. You talk about
for sure.
writers and books and education. Few people. There are many books
Yes,
written by Brazilians in Brazil. There are
yes,
few books read by Brazilians in Brazil.
for
Why?
sure,
It's a
for sure.
challenge. We still have a base of people who
Um,
are illiterate or functionally illiterate. So to
yes,
become
yes,
economically engaged today, not
yes,
only today, for a long, long time, but until today, even
yes.
for the younger generations, it's an uphill fight.
Yeah, true story. And I will give my experience, for example. And that's that you just mentioned. It's one of the reasons why it's so challenged. I will give my example. When I was a child, I was a poor child.
Hmm.
My background is a poor person. My family was really poor here in Brazil. So I grew up around favelas, right, and drug dealers and
Hmm.
all of those stuff, right. But I have a father and a mother that were graduated,
Right.
so I have the opportunity, to read, and that's why my love of different languages because
Right.
my mother used to read in French. So I have in that time the opportunity to open books
Hmm.
from different like Diderot, Rousseau, D'Alembert, like French intellectuals, right? And so my reference in literature was the European,
Right.
the white people,
Hmm.
for example, right? So and never I'm Brazilian. I remember that I started to know about uh, Brazilian who was thinkers and writers in the school at
Hmm.
school, right? But white, just white and white background, and and on of course the large majority that we used to study in that time, well, it came from Europe.
Right.
Our reference is European.
Right.
And
That's
I
true.
graduated here. I graduated here, and my view of Europe was totally different that I have today. When as a child, my reference was being white, right, and go to Europe to study. So I never recognized myself like a white person. So because part of my family was black and had a black culture,
Right.
I used to listen songs, religious songs in Yoruba, for example, as I mentioned to you in the comments in LinkedIn, right? So in my view, I was a black person but I was an intellectual person. So I had the opportunity to study abroad. I made money here. You know, and my story was a little bit different because normally people study to get a job and earn money, right?
Well,
But I start to earn money first, and then I have time to study. Totally different.
right.
Totally different. So I
Well,
went
but
to.
that's still the case for many persons today. If they don't have money or access
Yeah,
to
yeah,
sustainability, economic sustainability,
yeah,
they can't learn.
yeah,
They can't get into a school, or they
yeah,
can get into school, they
yeah.
may not be able to stay.
Yeah, yeah, and it's right. I remember because my background, my mother and my father were actually are intellectual person, had graduation. So every penny that I earned, was about study and acquiring knowledge. So I made money here, I earned money, and I went to Europe, right, to start my second bachelor degree.
Hmm.
I studied part of my actually was a sandwich bachelor. I studied here international relations, and I went to and then I go to Spain to start my bachelor there.
Hmm.
So I study international politics there, public international law, and economics in Spain. So when I started to study in Spain, I realized that wow, we are capable, so we can do this because my view is that I'm a black person, I'm not I don't deserve to be here. That's my inner,
Right. Yeah.
my
Well,
inner
that's your
my inner
self
mind,
talking to
my
yourself.
self talking to myself. Yeah, exactly. Well, I don't deserve to be here. So I went there and was one of the best students of the university at that time. And the classes that I courses there was one of the best students. And I was so glad, and so happy that we are capable, we can do this.
Right.
So, but what I want to illustrate is that my reference was Europe. You know, go out for me was not go to Africa, not go to Latin or other countries of Latin America. My
Right.
reference was Europe, right? But I went there and I said, "Oh, we are capable."
Hmm.
No, everybody deserves to know that and study. So I back to Brazil, and then I started to study here and started to speak with people that uh, you must have a voice here, and we can share this knowledge with different kind of people,
Well, and the
right?
sharing is back to what you actually did. You sometimes you have to get out to share outside, uh, and what
That's
you
right.
did is not really much. When I came here in 1970, most persons that I met at that time,
Right.
university level students, what have you, they weren't studying English; they were studying French.
True
In,
story.
in, in many,
True
in the
story.
1970s, and even at that time, the high schools, the lower grades were teaching French. And so France and Europe was exactly the reference. And if you would ask anybody at that time, where do you want to go? They want to go to France. They want to go to
Yes,
France, but not only because of the language, but the cultural,
the
the
culture.
artistic side, what have you. So that was the driver. Since I've been here, obviously, different cultures have opened up. We talked about the Koreans, the Japanese, the Chinese. Brazil has become an economical melting pot through the time I've been here.
Sure.
Because obviously the first looked, even for business persons, was Europe. So you had the influence of France, of Germany, Italy. When we talked automobile manufacturer, other type of manufacturers, they came from there. Then they started coming from everywhere else. And at one point, Brazil was probably the home to more automobile manufacturers than any other place in the world. And so that attraction comes from people like yourselves or other Brazilians like yourselves of mixed cultures, of mixed shades, who have gone out, who have shared their story and helped attract others to come here. Because still today, many persons, companies still do not have a correct, in my point of view, image of what the opportunities really are. And there are many, and until today, there's still so many opportunities here. And when everybody outside considers it's just one thing, or maybe two colors, or maybe whatever, there's still a long way to go. Well, Jayme, I want to thank you. We're coming to the end of our time. But
thank you.
I know you've had a fruitful, probably challenging career up until now. But having been where you have been, learned all the languages that you have, and having a multicultural understanding, and you probably know as much about cattle as people, right? So I can see why your success both on your international relations, right? You're a foreign policy analyst and selling cattle everywhere.
So the market, international market, and doing business, make friends.
Right.
That's all about.
Very good. Well, thank you for sharing your time, and thank you for sharing again and commenting on the post, which I'll be putting up on our site.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And
bye.
Bye. And for our listeners, you can find more about Jayme Callado. That's Jayme. The last name is Callado. You'll find him on LinkedIn as Jayme Callado Neto. Jayme Callado Neto. I'd like to thank our audience and our sponsor, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their website, focusmi.com. Remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.